Before we get into Adobe Camera Raw, I want to give you an appreciation of the power of shooting in RAW. And there's lots of debates with photographers about shooting JPEG or RAW. I followed a LinkedIn conversation on it for months. But here is the difference. I have a Facebook album that I've been working on for a while, which illustrates what you're getting by shooting in RAW. And you could think of RAW format as you doing the developing. You're going into the darkroom, you're choosing how long to expose it for, and you're getting just the image that you imagined. Well, the untouched or unedited camera raw is the closest thing you could get to film. It can't be overwritten, it doesn't destroy the data with lossy compression like JPEG does, but it's undeveloped. So here's an example of an undeveloped raw image. If I advance, you'll notice the pre-baked or already developed and sharpened JPEG, also color corrected. When I go to the third version, my usual goal is 2 minutes or less of correction time. And if you take note here, when I shot this dress, it was really more of a burgundy, and I liked the pattern in the dress. The pre-baked JPEG looks a little bit more pink, and you could barely see the white of the pattern that was originally captured. And from here to here, there is definitely a color shift. By me choosing to do the edits myself in Camera Raw, I was able to help the overall contrast, get exactly the color that I saw, or what I envisioned, and produce a much more compelling image overall. Here's a few more examples. Uncorrected, Camera Raw, untouched, unsharpened, undeveloped. Pre-baked JPEG, it's definitely a little better. The color's bluer, might be sharper. My correction in Camera Raw. This was taken at dawn at the Palace of Fine Arts, and there was this lovely golden sun, and you could see the rich blue sky, and we rarely ever get a day without clouds here in San Francisco, so it was just perfect, and I feel like I captured more of that moment when I shot it by doing my own developing, which I spent 4 minutes on this time. And an example from the Golden Gate Bridge, undeveloped, unsharpened, uncorrected. What the camera did for color correction and developing, what I did in Camera Raw. And I won't go through the last one, I'll just hide this and pop back over to Bridge. If you have a high-end camera, one that has changeable lenses, it's technically known as a DSLR, a digital single lens reflex. And in RAW formats, when you double click it, you automatically open the Camera Raw plugin in Photoshop. And when I took this shot, my goal was really to get the sky. It almost looked like a halo surrounding this portion of the Golden Gate Bridge as you're walking across the span. The JPEG is better. The color's a little boosted. If I make this wider, you could see it, but I can't really see the white of the clouds that I'd like, and it could use more contrast and work overall. So I have a workflow in Adobe Camera Raw where I'll almost always start with exposure, and I tend to go a little lighter in exposure than I'd like because I can bring back detail or help contrast by darkening the blacks and lightening or darkening the shadows. My focus for this image is really the clouds, so that helps boost it quite a bit. And I might back down exposure to keep some of that blue sky, but that's almost where I always go. Exposure first, then blacks, then shadows. Either open them up to see more detail or darken them. I'm going to go for darker in this case. If I slide down to clarity, clarity is mid-tone contrast, and it really gives depth. It's just making all the details much more prominent. It's not technically sharpening, but it does help the image quite a bit. I'll boost the vibrance, and I might do whites, lighter or darker, but if I go lighter, I want to be very careful that I don't lose detail or blow out information. If my whites go too far, this is pixels that I'm pushing too white, so there's no detail left in the sky. There may be clouds there, but you couldn't see any texture or any depth to them. So by turning on this little triangle warning in the upper right corner with one click, I could see where I'm losing detail, And this highlight slider is almost the last thing I do. I back it down until I'm preserving overall contrast. And I'll give it a few finishing tweaks. I'll also mention that I rarely use saturation. Saturation piles more color on top of one another, put it roughly. It just richens or saturates the ink, but I find it looks fake very fast. However, lately I've been experimenting with pulling the vibrance down and boosting the saturation, and they look very similar to leaving the saturation at 0 if I double click this and then boost the vibrance. I simply find vibrance more subtle, and I am happier with the result, but experiment on your own. And I didn't cover all of the dials, but this is where I start. I also, and this is a matter of personal choice, don't do a lot of contrast. Contrast can start to look very fake very fast, but some people really like that punched effect, that really contrasty edge. So when I'm finished, I'll check myself by doing before and after, and it's radically different. But I may find that my shadows are a little too dark, so I will always check my before and after, and then fine-tune my last adjustments. And when I hit done, I've committed to those changes. If I look at the image in Adobe Bridge, I'll see this little circle icon with 2 arrows on it that indicate I've made a Camera Raw adjustment. Now for your own class files, I'll clear that out, but I'll save a PSD in this folder so you can see what my adjustments look like, and then try this same image on your own.